Hello and welcome to the program. This morning details have emerged around the government's proposed debt tax, or the speculation is the government is going to propose this debt tax. And these are the reports this morning in the News Limited papers, the Daily Telegraph front page. Hockey's levy hits average workers. And let's go through a few of the details for you and where this is expected to kick in and the percentage of tax people are expected to pay, according to Terry McCrann's report. Those in the bracket of $80,000 a year to $180,000 will pay an extra 1% in tax, $15 a week for those on 80k, 150k, $29 a week. Those on over 200,000, or in fact over 180, will pay an extra 2%, according to the McCrann report. 200,000, nearly $80 a week, and those on 400,000, more than $150 a week, according to the News Limited papers this morning. With me to discuss this and the other issues of the day, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and the Shadow Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. Josh Frydenberg, this is a brave move to target everyone across the income spectrums with not insignificant tax rises here.
Look, I'm not going to preempt any announcements that will be made in the budget, other than to say the Prime Minister's speech last night was very important because he made clear that every Australian has to share some of the pain. If we are going to improve our economy, if we are going to move from an age of entitlement, we do need a substantial number of new measures. And the Prime Minister's speech outlined the rationale behind the decisive action that we'll see in the budget. And no longer, Kieran, can we go through with Labor's approach, which is all care, no responsibility. It's okay to make Labor's announcements of handouts here and handouts there, but at the end of the day, you have to pay for it. And we understand that that time has come for Australia to pay for its debt, and we want to start reducing government spending.
Didn't the Prime Minister also promise in opposition that there'd be no new taxes?
Well, certainly we are the party of tax reduction, and you've seen that with our commitment to getting rid of the carbon tax, the mining tax, and reducing the company tax rate. But at the end of the day, we do need to balance the budget. As the Prime Minister said in his speech, the budget blowout that occurred under Labor is leading to $667 billion worth of debt, and that involves an interest bill of more than $10 billion a year. And at those levels, government no longer controls the debt, debt controls the government. And that's why we need to start taking urgent action.
Now, this Telegraph report, Brendan O'Connor, says that the budget will show that to do nothing would mean deficits adding to $160 billion over the next 4 years. That is enormous. How can Labor be opposed to the idea of a levy, given that you adopted a levy, this sort of concept anyway, in government?
Well, Tony Abbott is Dr Jekyll and Mr Hyde of Australian politics. I mean, Mr Hyde before the election, Dr Jekyll after. I've never seen any political leader change so fundamentally his view before and after election as this Prime Minister. He said no new taxes, and he promised no excuses, no surprises. This is a contrived excuse, and it's more than a surprise. It's an absolute shock to Australian workers who will be expected to pay outrageously for the way in which the Prime Minister and the Treasurer has changed the parameters of the budget to contrive this doubling of the deficit. Now, and I think the Prime Minister must be held account here. I mean, he was all for attacking the previous government for what he would say were views that were different to what was committed to before an election. But this is a fundamental breach of faith with the Australian people, and he has to explain himself. And to date, there is no good reason why ordinary working families should be slugged this outrageous impost.
Well, isn't this about sharing the burden of trying to balance the books? Basically, you've got people on $80,000 to $180,000 a year paying a bit more, 1%. Those earning over $180,000, high income earners, paying an extra 2%. Isn't that fair? Isn't that a Labor way of going about it?
Let's talk about that. I have no problems when we have a tax system that's progressive. That is, the people like myself, a reasonably high income earner, are paying more than people who earn less than me.
Well, this idea is progressive, isn't it?
I have no problems, and that's the way in which you accumulate revenue. But the entire proposition that you impose this outrageous tax upon Australian workers when you went into an election and put your hand on your heart and said there'd be no new taxes and you cannot tax your way to prosperity. I mean, these are the words that are remembered by the Australian voters before they voted. And within 7 months after an election, the Prime Minister chooses just to fundamentally backflip on that commitment. I mean, it's dishonourable, it's deceitful. That's why this is not just this is a deficit tax, but it is a deceit tax, because it is fundamentally at odds with the commitment that the Prime Minister made when in opposition.
Josh Frydenberg, the Prime Minister has made a great deal of honouring commitments, and the suggestion that there'd be no new taxes was a commitment made in opposition. How is he going to justify this shift? Because whether you call it a levy or however you describe it, it's an increase in tax.
Well, look, let's just see what the budget reveals, Kieran. But the point that Brendan and his Labor colleagues are in denial about is the state of the Australian economy and the state of the government's books. We do have projected deficits for many years to come. The IMF detailed the spending commitments of 17 advanced economies around the world, and Australia had the fastest and highest rates of spending, more so than Canada and the United States, France and Germany, Japan and Korea. The reality is we are spending money we just do not have. And when you look at the demographic challenge that Australia faces, a doubling in the number of people over the age of 65 in the coming decades and a quadrupling of the number of people over the age of 85, this is going to lead to great strain on the budget. And one of the startling figures that Joe Hockey cited in his speech just last week was the number of working Australians supporting the number of people over the age of 65 will halve between now and 2050. I mean, that's an amazing statistic, and that's why we need to take action.
Well, the Prime Minister referred to the issue of pensions last night in his speech at the Sydney Institute. Let's replay that for our viewers who might not have caught up with that.
To keep our commitments, there will be no changes to the pension during this term of Parliament, but there should be changes to indexation arrangements and eligibility thresholds in 3 years' time. There are other social security benefits where indexation arrangements and eligibility thresholds could be adjusted now. Adjusting indexation slows the rate of increase and helps to ensure that a strong social safety net can be preserved for everyone's future.
Brendan O'Connor, now you are accusing the Prime Minister of a broken promise, of deceit when it comes to the debt tax, but when it comes to the issue of the pension, you can't accuse him of breaking any promise. He said there'll be no change this term, and any proposed change will be taken to the people. That's an entirely appropriate course of action.
Certainly, he didn't, of course, make references to these matters before the election, but of course he is saying that he would commit himself to putting this idea forward for the Australian people to consider before the next election, and certainly that's a different approach. I think it's important, though, when you have a government with such twisted priorities that, for example, continues to provide massive tax relief to the highest superannuants in this country, but looks to take money off people on very modest incomes in pensions, you do have to wonder whether this government is one that is looking at those that are affected by cost of living pressures, or indeed just wants to look after its rich mates. But we'd like to see the detail on this, but we have a concern that people who have built this country, have spent 50 years of their lives working and paying taxes, are going to be slugged on what are really modest incomes. But again, we'll see the detail. This is somewhat different, of course, as you say, because it's talking about something further down the track. But you'd want to see how it impacts on people that are doing it pretty tough, Kieran.
Josh Frydenberg, one of the issues, the questions of priorities been raised in terms of the paid parental leave scheme as well. There's a report in the Australian Financial Review this morning that Mr Abbott risks being rolled over his signature policy, that one of your colleagues in the Senate, Ian McDonald, among others, Bernardi, Dean Smith, that they've all got concerns and might cross the floor. McDonald has said on the record that he's worried about the priorities here, that you're going to spend billions on this paid parental leave scheme, yet have cuts elsewhere. And of course we know this debt tax as well.
Well, one of the statistics that came out yesterday, Kieran, was Australia's falling productivity. And we know that we have less women in the workforce compared to other major economies around the world like Canada. And so that's what's behind a paid parental leave scheme, which is fair dinkum, not like Labor's paid parental leave scheme, which is only 18 weeks at minimum wage without any superannuation. So Tony Abbott's absolutely right. We do need a proper paid parental leave scheme. The World Health Organisation says that mothers need to spend at least 6 months with their children. No other country in the world has a paid parental leave scheme at minimum wage.
It looks like you've got to convince your colleagues of this argument, Josh Frydenberg, though, because a number, Liberals and Nationals, reportedly considering abstaining or crossing the floor.
Well,
scuttle it.
Well, I'd hope that wouldn't happen because we did take this policy to the last election and we're committed to continuing to go forward with it, to implement it. Obviously, that will depend on the numbers in the Senate, but as a policy priority, the paid parental leave scheme will improve the lot of the Australian economy, and it's one area where we can actually boost productivity and increase the number of women in the workforce.
Well, that's a point that Tony Abbott has made very strongly over the years, and he's wedded to this policy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it, Kieran? I mean, here we have a Prime Minister who says he wants to start imposing new taxes, a surprise upon workers who are earning $80,000, but wants to provide a parental leave benefit to millionaires to pay them up to $75,000 if they're earning $150,000 or more. I mean, this is that's why people are questioning the priorities of this government, because it seems on one hand they look after people at the top end of town, on the other they want to slug pensioners, they want to slug people on family tax benefits, they want to put taxes on low-paid workers. And just think about this tax on small businesses. 2/3 of small businesses in this country are unincorporated. They don't pay the carbon tax, which is supposedly going to be repealed. But they'll pay this tax that's been announced. They'll pay this tax that's being announced by the Prime Minister. So they're going to have a new tax, and they're not even getting any tax relief from this government.
Well, let's go to Josh on that, because a lot of small businesses do pay income tax, and 2/3, as Brendan O'Connor argues. What do you say to that?
Well, of course they're going to benefit from the paid parental leave scheme. In fact, they're going to see...
No, he's talking about the debt tax there.
Oh, sorry, the debt tax in terms of small businesses.
They're going to have to pay that. They're going to have to pay that tax.
Well, let's just see what the budget reveals. I'm not going to respond to speculation from Brendan, or indeed...
It's not speculation. The Prime Minister announced it in the speech last night.
No, he didn't. You would.
No, effectively he has.
I was there, Brendan.
It's a strategic leak. It's a strategic leak by the government announcing before the budget what they're going to do.
Well, let's hear Josh's response now. Josh?
Let's just remember, Brendan was one of 6 small business ministers that Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd turned over like hot
Now, we didn't impose a tax upon them. We introduced instant asset tax write-off, which you repealed.
Brendan O'Connor, please. Let's hear from Josh Frydenberg. Let's have the answer without interruption, Josh.
That's right. You did nothing for small business. Removing the carbon tax will absolutely help small business. When it comes to assisting small business, we want to see more women in the workforce. We want to see small business be able to employ people. Then they can take their paid parental leave and come back. When it comes to this...
But they're going to pay the tax.
When it comes to this so-called levy that you're talking about, let's just wait and see what's revealed on budget day. Hope you can hold your breath till then, Brendan.
We're going to take a break. We're out of time with Josh Frydenberg and Brendan O'Connor. Back with Michael O'Neill from Australian Seniors in a moment. But gentlemen, for today, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Back on AIM Agenda in just a moment.